Hello and welcome back to Switch and Lever. As many of you know who have followed me for some time, both here and on Instagram, I'm a huge patron of flea markets. Last year when I visited San Francisco and the Bay Area, I made a video about the various antique stores and flea markets I go to when I'm here. Rather than repeat that this year, I've decided to focus on one flea market in particular, one huge flea market out on the island of Alameda. I'll be touching upon some of the strategies I use when flea marketing and how to navigate something this immensely massive in a reasonably short time. Some general tips and tricks, and of course I'll be showing some very cool things I found. So let's get the intro out of the way and get this show on the road. The real reason I came out to California was for Faire Bay Area, and while that is a fun event in itself, and I even this year had the chance to present the Maker Knife and how to take your product ID into reality through production in China, you're really here to hear about the flea markets. So let's wake up at an ungodly hour on a Sunday morning, take a foggy drive across town through San Francisco, across the Bay Bridge, and hit up the northern parts of Alameda. Alameda Point once held a large naval base, but may be most known today for being one of the sites Mythbusters frequently used for some of their outdoor tests. The first Sunday of every month it's turned into an enormous antiques fair, routinely hosting more than 800 vendors spread out over 10 hectares. These are everything from small tables selling a mishmash of small knickknacks to larger operations with very well selected material and prices to go with it. Everyone from pickers to well-established antique dealers come here to sell, so the selection is both vast and varied. That is also one huge reason why I love going to antique markets like this, the constant assault on the senses of this exact varied selection of material. While I generally am on the lookout for tools, I constantly find new and exciting things that pique my interest or that inspire new things to create. For instance, there was this one guy selling old airplane and Air Force material that had been sitting in his father's warehouse since the 1960s. It's a table I could have left very poor from if I could have thought of a practical way of getting all this material back home to Europe. I did end up buying something from him though, but I will leave that reveal to the very end of the video. Of course, with all this random stuff, it makes it difficult and time-consuming to find the gems hiding among all the chaff. In a way, this is something that comes with experience. You learn to condition your brain and your eyes into a certain kind of pattern recognition to quickly disregard sellers which obviously have no interesting material for sale. This is a dangerous practice, however, and one that is in constant state of honing, as many of the best finds I've made over the years have been from sellers selling things not at all related to tools, but ended up having something special they don't know anything about that they acquired randomly. So by some accounts you will lose out on some of those rare finds if you do your selection process too carelessly. While it may time-wise be possible to scrutinize everything in detail if you go to a smaller market, going to a fair of this size, it's simply impossible to visit every stand and look at everything in detail. For comparison, we were there for 5 hours and that only included one walkthrough. Go through it all again and you could easily spend the entire day there. It is important to allow yourself time to stop when you see something cool though, something that's out of the ordinary even if you have no intention of buying it. I usually have a lot of conversations with vendors at these markets, learning about various items of interest, figuring out their history and their importance in the world. I've thought more than once that if I were to switch careers, I would go into opening my own antiques shop, specializing in industrial items such as tools, machinery and related ephemera. But that may be in another time, in another life. There were actually a fair amount of tool vendors on site, with tools ranging from woodworking, metalworking, specialist machinist tools, horology tools and more. Unfortunately for me, I had a luggage weight limit, so I couldn't go entirely crazy, and my specific area of interest, metrology, is somewhat pointless to look for when in the States, as most measuring devices, like my beloved micrometers, are solely in imperial measurements. I tend not to pick up things which are not metric unless they're extremely special objects. There were some cool mechanical devices in some stands as well, like this Reddington counter which I just about picked up, but the guy wanted a little bit too much money for it to make it worth my while. Maybe the most wonderful thing that I found that I'm still kind of kicking myself for not buying is this small, fully functional business card printing press. It was missing a couple of rollers, but those would be easy enough to manufacture. It was a little bit out of my budget though, and factoring in the price it would cost to ship it back to Europe, it just did not make much sense. Still, what a beauty. So let's get to the elephant in the fair. Well, no, sorry, that's a raccoon. Let's talk about haggling. I know many people feel awkward haggling, and many just cannot handle it at all. I come from a very non-haggling culture, and it took me some time to get rid of the hesitations I had around asking for a better price. My personal strategy is, if I find something, is to immediately cut 1/3 of the listed price. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but at least it starts up negotiations. My end goal is not to get 1/3 of the price, even though sometimes I of course do, but rather to land around 20% discount. Sometimes, for certain items, I don't haggle at all if the stated price is fair and cheap enough. I have no interest in trying to trick vendors who price things fairly and within my budget into selling things at an unfair price. I do feel that a certain fairness is required as well, so it doesn't only become a game of how cheap you can get something, but actually becomes more about the interest in the items you want to buy. Everyone loves a bargain, but I feel being fair, especially with vendors you may see time and time again and get to know over successive visits, reaps much greater rewards in the long run. I've had vendors setting things aside for me because they knew it was right up my alley, and that's something you get from building a rapport with someone, not trying to squeeze their arm trying to get the best deal imaginable. So before we take a look at the items I actually got from the flea market, here's a word from today's sponsor. And you guessed it, it's PCBWay. While their products are hardly something you would find at a flea market for many years to come, they do make excellent quality PCBs. They're just now celebrating their 5-year anniversary, and with it are offering some great deals and discounts on many of their products. If you have a project in need of circuit boards, be sure to give PCBWay a try. And with a 99% on-time delivery rate, you can rest assured that you'll have your PCBs on time for your project. Remember that supporting Switch and Lever sponsors helps this channel to grow. Anyway, let's take a little look at what I actually ended up picking up from the Alameda Antiques Fair. As I said, I had a limited space, but I did come away with 2 pretty neat optical items, 2 horology items, and one of the coolest things I've ever bought. One is a solid brass loop from Van Court Instruments in amazing shape. I'm a sucker for both brass and optical devices, though I rarely know what to use them for. I'm sure this will come in handy in the shop though, especially when inspecting solder joints and traces. I also picked up a small viewfinder simply because it looked cool in front of the lens of my phone. This is one of those things with limited usage, but sometimes you just gotta get something for the fun of it, especially if it's just $1 or $2. The 2 horology items are 2 different vices for watchmaking. The first one is called a poising tool and used to balance various watch parts. The jaws, they're not really used as much for clamping as having each side of an axle with a wheel or gear resting on it as you balance it. It's difficult to ascertain its age, but I found almost identical ones online dated around the mid-19th century. More modern poising tools tend to have 3 legs to aid in leveling and often ruby jaws as well. The second item is a case or movement holder for holding a full watch movement as you work on it, as illustrated here by this €1 coin. I have a watch that I'm restoring, so I'm sure both these items will come in useful in the future. And finally, something that I have absolutely no use for, but it's so cool that I can hardly contain myself. It's this huge remove before flight tag from the guy I mentioned in the beginning selling airplane parts. This isn't just any tag though, but one that was used in rocket firing safety. How amazingly cool isn't that? But what should I do with it? Should I put it on my keychain and leave it hanging out of my pocket? Should I use it as a flag on my car? Leave some creative comments below if you have some fantastical uses for it which respects its origins. I would really love to get some input on this. But that's all for now. I really hope you enjoyed this trip out to Alameda. Check out the flea market video I made last year and do the usual things, like, subscribe, follow on Instagram and buy some really cool merch. Until next time!